This afternoon, we're going to be looking at resourcing AI. And this session is being held in partnership with iMasons Climate Accord. So if any of you are in here looking for the session on productive uses of energy, you're in the wrong room, and you need to go to the Kamaha Grand. So this session is going to be looking at the impact that additions of data loads can have on the grids, on electricity prices, and on decarbonisation targets, and the measures and best practices that can boost their sustainability. We're going to talk about the importance of making AI energy sourcing compatible with the energy transition, and look at a range of different approaches that can make data centres front-runners in renewable energy adoption. So we're going to have a couple of scene-setting presentations first, and I'd like to call Adrian Gonzalez, Programme Officer at IRENA, to the stage to give us an idea about what IRENA thinks. He works with IRENA as the leading Programme Officer on innovation in end-use sectors.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, distinguished audience, for coming up here. So indeed, we will talk about how to resource data centers, and in particular data centers for AI. I would like to start with an innocent question, a comparison. What do you think is the energy consumption of a fridge and of a smartphone? How does it compare? What do you think about it? I will already give you the answer. So we have here that the average smartphone for charging consumes around 5.5 kilowatt hours in a year, while an efficient fridge of nowadays around 110 kilowatt hours a year. So charging 20 smartphones is more or less the equivalent to using one fridge. But charging is only the visible part, so there is more in this story. Cloud services. We use social media, we use video streaming, we use gaming. All these services are not handled directly by the phone, but by servers that are located elsewhere remotely. If we add that into the comparison, it turns out that a fridge is more or less consuming the same amount of energy in a year that an AI plus the allocation, plus the smartphone plus the allocation of the cloud services, including AI. And AI is making the difference on this regard. So going to the global picture, we have talked this morning about the historical energy consumption from data centers. We have here again the chart, and we have a lot of forecasts and projections on how will be the adoption of data centers impacting the global energy consumption from data centers. So as we can see here, some of the projections imply doubling in 5 years the data centers consumption globally. As mentioned before, it's already at more than 20% in Ireland. It's expected to be 30% in 2030. Some voices saying that in US it will be the 10% of the electricity demand. So I want to talk now about the factors that affect these projections, because in the end, they are projections. No? They have a lot of uncertainty. The degree of adoption of AI is one of them. The complexity of the models, the hardware, the performance of the hardware, the efficiency of this hardware. We have all heard about this Jevons paradox, or the rebound effect, meaning that perhaps, yes, we make hardware more efficient, but these efficiency gains imply that we use more artificial intelligence, and therefore the increase in demand is higher than the savings we get from the efficiency. And also, for instance, power grid availability. which can be a bottleneck for new data centers connecting, and therefore limit the growth of the expected growth of AI. In IRENA, we believe that even more important than the amount is the source. So here you have a grasp of how a data center can be sourced. You can have a look at the possibilities. The first, the easiest, the data center connects to the power system, and it purchases the electricity from the national mix. Therefore, the resources, the energy sources feeding this data center will depend on the national energy mix. We have also the power purchase agreement avenue that is widely adopted, where the resources don't need to be placed together with the data center, can be remote. And we also have co-location options where a power plant is located directly next to the data center, or the data center goes to be commissioned next to power generation. In this regard, there is some dramatic case study here. We have seen gas power plants feeding directly data centers. Why I'm saying it's dramatic, if you think about it, we are having efforts ongoing for electrifying uses like transport, road transport, heating in buildings, and by electrification we achieve to make use of renewables for this energy demand. And data centers, which are computers in the end, are native electricity consumers. So using the fossil fuel avenue is definitely not the way to go. So let's focus on renewables. We have two possibilities. We can talk about, as mentioned, building the renewables next to the data center, or building the data center next to the renewables. It was mentioned this morning the case of Brazil, with a lot of renewable power available. We have others, as Kenya, with a lot of geothermal. But the problem is that sometimes the telecommunications infrastructure is not there in the scale it needs for the data centers to be placed in those locations, and that's why we see many issues in other congested areas like Virginia in the US, also the area of Dublin here in Europe, also in China, in Malaysia, and other alternatives like the power purchase agreements mentioned before become really interesting for this. So, despite the example of the gas power plants feeding some data centers mentioned before, the major data center operators are being world leaders pushing the deployment of new renewable energy sources. It's important to acknowledge this, and this graph reflects this. The power purchase agreements contracted in these last years speak by themselves. But there is something to focus here, and if you see the sources, there is a huge preponderance of solar power. And this may have some issues in the long term, in the bigger picture. So despite the massive adoption, massive deployment of renewables by data centers, by PPAs, we have seen this mismatch, no? This lack of alignment, lack of correlation between the time, the hours when the renewables purchases by these data centers actually produce, if they are solar, and the actual pattern of consumption from the data centers. So for this reason, we can have market volatility and see negative prices, for instance, during solar hours, because there is an excess of production already contracted by someone in the system from the PV panels, while this production is not being taken by someone else, would be the orange part of the curve that is not overlapping the blue. And we could see also higher prices of electricity during peak demand hours, namely in the late evenings, where the solar is not there and the data center still is consuming. So we are all here innovators, and innovation always brings or leads to solutions. And some of the solutions are here. Diversified portfolios of renewables matched with storage can solve the mentioned problem. It's important to highlight that when we talk about renewables, we are not talking exclusively about variable renewables like wind and solar, but also hydropower and also geothermal. So it's important to take this into account to prevent this myth saying that renewables are not able to provide firm power required by data centers. And of course, storage is here to help. It is cost efficient nowadays, and when matched with the variable renewables, it can also make the case. So colleagues there later in the panel will talk about granular certificates, for instance. That is a concept that grasps very well this solution I was talking about here. Other problem for data centers is the grid. I heard from a data center operator that he will be willing to pay double the electricity prices if he will be getting the permitting times halved. This is because permitting for data centers usually means connecting to congested grids near the cities, and therefore reinforcement of the grids are usually needed. And this takes time. Of course, transmission is not built overnight. But for this, we also have solutions. We are innovators. So flexible connection agreement can be a solution here. The fact that the data center can be coupled with storage or can shift the computational load to another data center cluster during certain hours allows these data centers to be connected where they actually want to connect next to the end users, and therefore enables not delaying the digital revolution while being compatible with the energy transition that is the focus. So to conclude, here is a bit of the work IRENA is doing on this regard. We are foreseeing some archetypes to take advantage of the mentioned diversified renewable portfolios and also the coupling with renewables and flexibilities to encourage regulators and policymakers to ease the connection of data centers while supporting the energy transition. I will not enter more in details because we have a fantastic panel ahead. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrian. Could I ask Jill McArdle to come up to the stage? Jill's the international corporate campaigner at Beyond Fossil Fuels, and she focuses on energy and emissions footprint of data centers and AI, as well as accounting for carbon emissions. Thanks.
Great. There's nowhere to put this water. Let me just check. Hello. Let me just check if I know how this clicker works. Yes, it's very simple. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jill from Beyond Fossil Fuels, and I wanted to complement what Adrian had to say in scene setting, talking a bit about AI and data centers specifically in Europe and what the growth means for the energy transition. I wanted to start by briefly explaining a bit about Beyond Fossil Fuels, the organization that I work for. So we are a coalition that's working towards the transition of the power sector to renewable energy. And I wanted to quickly point out, this is a huge slide, it's hard for me to point at things, but I will try. Make the European power sector fossil-free and renewables-based by 2035. This is a very important framing that we have, that we speak about the need for it to be renewables-based, but also the need for it to be fossil-free, because you need to make sure that the renewables you are adding are displacing fossil fuels and slowly pushing those fossil fuels out of the economy. And this is something that we cannot forget when we're doing, because that is how we will actually get the energy transition done in the end. And this is quite important when we speak about data centers and AI, which is adding new demand into the economy. And then we need to think about the impact of that new demand on the pushing out of fossil fuels. So Adrian already talked a bit about the growth of data centers and AI in the world, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I chose this slide because it shows all of the different projections that have been compiled by the IEA in a recent report. And I just wanted to make the point that there's a lot of different projections, there's a lot of different variables, and it is hard to make accurate estimates of where exactly the growth is going globally. But it's very clear that one way or another, the trajectory at the moment is upwards, and this is largely driven by AI because there's a lot of investment today in big tech companies in AI, the expansion of AI infrastructure. So what we did at Beyond Fossil Fuels, we published a report back in February on the impact on the energy transition in Europe. And we weren't setting out to make the definitive projection of data center demand growth in Europe. We wanted to take some projections and make an estimate so that we could then start to ask questions about what the implications of that growth might be for the energy transition, for fossil fuel phase out and renewable energy in Europe. So we came up with these figures. They're a rough estimate based on IEA and McKinsey projections, calculating an annual growth rate to see where we could be by 2030. So you see the growth could be quite high. There's some low and high end scenarios here. But the purpose of this was so that we could then ask the question, what does it mean if this is powered by fossil fuels or by renewable energy? So we asked, what if over half of this is powered by fossil fuels? And we thought this was an important question to ask today because, as Adrian mentioned, there are data centers today connecting to gas networks in places like Ireland. There's quite a queue of data centers in Ireland to connect directly to the gas network there. We know, for example, in Germany, there's a plan to expand gas infrastructure by up to 20 gigawatts. So we thought it at least relevant to ask the question, what does this mean? Although we have, say, supply chain issues with gas, which could, stymie some of these ambitions. So unsurprisingly, if a lot of this new demand is met by gas, we will see a lot more emissions in Europe. 121 million was the high-end scenario we came to. To put it in context, that's about the emissions from all the gas plants in the UK, Germany, and Italy in 1 year, so in 2024. So understandably, we want to avoid this scenario, as Adrian also mentioned. I wanted to jump in on Ireland specifically. Ireland is a very interesting case because it's where we're seeing it's a very dense concentration of data centers, specifically in Dublin. There's actually a moratorium there today. I am from Dublin, so this is a personal point as well, where we're seeing huge growth in data centers. So it's very helpful to look at what's happening in Ireland so we can see the potential future impacts of accelerated data center growth. And here I wanted to point out something very interesting, which is these are slides from an academic, Hannah Daly in Ireland. She's shown that data centers are the only new source of electricity demand in Ireland, adding significant emissions up until 2030. So you have other new electricity demands, but they tend to be decarbonizing the economy. And I think that was a point that Adrian made as well, whereas data centers are not directly decarbonizing, and therefore they're the main impact on Ireland's climate goals. We also asked the question, not only what if this is fossil fuels, but what if this new demand is met with renewable energy? Because this is obviously where we want to go, and we want it to be met with renewable energy. What we found, though, was that data center demand growth at the high end could lead to taking up to 20% of the renewables that the IEA at least projects may come online in Europe in the next 5 years. That's roughly the same as what the transport sector might need to decarbonize itself by 2030. And as I mentioned, you have the transport sector, which is electrifying in order to decarbonize, to reduce emissions, and then you have data center demand, which is playing a different role in the economy. I wanted to go back to Ireland again, my favorite example, to show a bit, again, what can happen in the end with access to renewable energy and data center demand, where here you can see the blue line is wind energy. It's all the wind energy output in Ireland. And then data center demand is the red line, and it's already just peaked past the total wind energy available in Ireland. And now this really speaks to the need for additionality when data center operators are actually procuring renewable energy. And the researcher Hannah Daly has estimated that only about 16% of the new data center demand in Ireland is actually being met by PPAs today. This is corporate power purchase agreements, if anyone is not familiar. So, yeah, so getting away from graphs, I wanted to highlight that this situation in Ireland is already leading to a debate about prioritization and who gets access to the energy. And I just wanted to make the point that we can expect, as data center demand grows, that we will have more and more of these debates and questions about where the energy needs to go and where the renewable energy needs to go. I wanted to point out that the EU has already taken notice of this. So the EU has mentioned in the EU Action Plan for Affordable Energy that data centers play a specific role because they have the capacity to outbid other energy users in the economy. And this, if not well managed, could lead to them driving up energy prices and could potentially limit access to energy for other users. And as I mentioned, we have several other sectors that are in desperate need of electrifying and in access to more energy and more renewable energy so that they can decarbonize themselves by 2030. So I wanted to now, something Adrian has already shown this a little bit, I wanted to talk about how data centers can really drive fossil fuels out of their procurement strategies. And I wanted to start by talking about the role of big tech so far, because I will point out I had a slide, I deleted it, didn't have a lot of time. Big tech, so the Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta to a large extent, are driving up to 65% of the new power demand in Europe today, whether that's their own builds or whether that's through co-location data centers and renting space. So historically, they've been huge drivers of the energy transition, investing more than any other sector and industry in renewable energy. So they have been very progressive on this front. As Adrian pointed out, though, there is a bit of a catch to this, and I wanted to focus on a slightly different area of this catch. So today, we're seeing that despite these investments in renewables, their demand is still outstripping their ambitions in this area, and we're seeing this lead to a rise in their, well, firstly, the big tech companies worrying that they're not going to meet their climate goals, and we're seeing a rise in their emissions that's leading them to be more concerned and start to say, we're not sure if we can get here. We have this famous quote from the head of Microsoft who had a moonshot climate goal, and now he has said that the moon has moved. So this is my most complicated slide, and this is what Adrian was getting at with the hourly matching, and I wanted to take a step back and try to really explain why we talk about moving towards hourly matching, especially for data center operators when they're buying renewable energy. So over here on the side, you can see the situation today, which is that a data center can claim to be running on solar power at night. So this is because of the purchasing of renewable energy certificates or guarantees of origin in Europe, which today are matched on an annual basis. And that means that, say you have a data center in Germany that's being powered at night, this data center can buy certificates from Spain for solar power that was produced during the day and at a different location on a different grid as well. So the energy is not deliverable to that data center, but they can still claim the emissions reductions for that. Now, this system was set up for good reason. It was set up to encourage renewable energy investment, and it has done that up to an extent. The problem is today, at the stage of the energy transition we're at, it's not incentivizing companies to really think about how to get the fossil fuels off the grid that they're operating on. So their data center is still running on fossil fuels in Germany, but they don't have to worry about that because they have a certificate that says they are renewable. And I pointed here, this leads to Amazon being able to claim that they're 100% renewable when we are fairly certain that a lot of their data centers still run on grids that rely on fossil fuels. I wanted to point out The Guardian did some research here that showed the reporting gap this leads to as well, where you see the emissions when you take into account location-based, so that means the actual grid where the data center is running. When you look at the emissions there versus the reported emissions based on the certificates, you get two very different numbers. And I wanted to mention that, so Google, 2 minutes. Okay, that's going to be a problem. So Google is making strides towards 24-hour carbon-free energy. Others, like Amazon and Meta, are moving in the opposite direction. So this is a struggle we have today. Where can I go? So quickly, I wanted to say, hourly matching is cost competitive. It decarbonizes and it is affordable for companies today. If you want these slides, I have to move through them now very quickly, but I will give them to you. Storage, only 2% of the PPAs we have today actually embed storage into them, and this is critical. We can do 80 to 90% hourly matching of renewable energy for data centers and other industries today with PPAs if we embed storage in those, and we have the technology today to be 80 to 90% matched. You might hear a lot about investments in SMRs, small modular reactors, for companies talking about trying to get to 100% carbon-free energy. This is a better bet. SMRs do not exist today. They're not going to exist in the next 5 years. They may not exist in the next 10 to 15 years. And I wanted to end, before my summary, by talking about some of the narratives you might hear around AI growth, data center growth, emissions, and energy. Because this is a concern to us as an organization working on the energy transition. You are starting to hear, as the companies realize, like the big tech companies, that they may not be able to meet their climate ambitions because of their AI business strategies, you're starting to hear more and more the suggestion that AI will offset these emissions and impacts through future emission savings and other environmental benefits. You can see here from Google, also from Microsoft, and I wanted to put in context this quote as well, that what is happening today is the companies have a desperate need for energy, whether it's renewable, non-renewable, whatever. This is what they need to drive their AI strategies forward today. And as they understand this, we start to hear more and more the suggestion that we don't need to deal directly with the emissions from AI. And this is also a graph from the IEA, which we found a bit problematic because it tries to assess the speculative future emission savings from AI and put that in contrast to the data center emissions. On the one hand, this is highly speculative. We don't know. I wanted to point out this number, 5 to 10%. So Google says 5 to 10% of global greenhouse emissions could be saved by AI. This number, you might hear it, it's not based on any data or research or analysis. It has no scientific basis today because we don't know. We simply don't know. And the IEA also makes a very speculative attempt to assess this. And what they cannot assess is the rebound effects, which Adrian mentioned, which is we do not know how many emissions, indirect emissions, that AI is going to cause. So the point being, we need to address the emissions today, so focusing on the investments in renewable energy and procurement strategies is extremely important. And that's my summary. We need to get companies to phase out fossil fuels. We need to commit to, I would say, up to 90% hourly matching for companies that want priority access to the grid. They should be aiming at being 90% hourly matched. And this should be a criteria for allowing access to the grid when we need to prioritize other sectors at the same time. I mentioned storage, demand flexibility, which Adrian thankfully went through so I don't have to. Yeah, and policies that maintain the AI growth within sustainable limits so that we can actually get the energy transition done while we are growing this sector. And transparency. I didn't get a chance to talk much about it, but we don't have a lot of transparency today on emissions, on the energy consumption, on the load projections of data centers, and we really need this if we're going to safely plan in data centers into the energy transition. And I will stop.
Thanks, Jill. That was great. And I think the transparency issue is really important, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that in the panel discussion. On which note, I would like to invite Romain Tranchant, Executive Director of iMasons Climate Accord, to come up to the stage because he will be moderating this afternoon's panel discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, or as they say in this beautiful country, guten Tag. If I butchered it, I'm sorry, I don't speak the language. Thank you for choosing to spend the afternoon with us. We're going to try and make it as interesting as we can. If you're not part of this data center world, don't worry, I am not part of your world either, and I'm learning a lot. My name is Romain Tranchant. I'm the chair of the Innovation Committee for Infrastructure Masons, which is a global non-profit professional associations grouping 6,000 individuals working all together in the digital infrastructure economy. I am representing today the Infrastructure Masons Climate Accords, who are actually sponsoring this afternoon. And they're uniting organizations on carbon reductions in the digital infrastructure, of which renewable energies is a large part. So before I invite our panelists to join me on stage, I'd like to go through a few numbers. You've seen the growth of the data center industry. iMasons has put a report together on the state of the data centers, inviting all of their members to contribute. And this is what we could gather. Today, there is a 55 gigawatts of total capacity of data centers across the world. Currently under constructions, which means agreed, approved, and coming up, there is another 15 gigawatts of data centers literally being built. Now, more importantly, there is another 135 gigawatt in planning. So just to set that across, if everything comes to fruition, we will literally multiply by 4 the amount of data centers on this planet. To put that into perspective, we estimate today that data centers use about 1 to 2% of the global energy. By 2030, it will climb to 3 to 4%, which in context is just about what Japan is actually using in total energy every year. And we have to say, finding energy, finding the right type of energy is actually one of the critical aspects of building new data centers, which is why I'm very pleased to actually be here today. So help me welcome our panelists for today. First, Sylvie Tarnai, Chief Strategist Office at Energy Pool, a pioneer in the French flexibility market since 2009. Next to the panel, you know her already, Jean McArdle, International Corporate Campaigner at Beyond Fossil Fuels, a coalition of civil society organizations striving for a just transition to a fossil-free renewables-based power system. Next, I'd like to welcome Trigya Singh, Head of Corporate Sourcing at the Global Renewable Alliance, created to unify the global bodies representing the renewable technologies required to deliver at least 11,000 gigawatt of renewable by 2030. I would also like to invite Gema del Rio, Energy Transition and International Affairs at the Institute for the Diversification of Saving of Energy, an agency of the Spanish Ministry for the Ecological Transition. And last, I would like to welcome Andres da Costa, Director of Innovation Europe at LevelTen Energy, a leading provider of transaction infrastructure for the energy transitions. Welcome. So as we get started, I'd like to invite our panelists. I know they've been thoroughly networking for the last few days, but in case you do not know any people in the room, could you please go ahead and present yourselves?
So I start. Great, hello. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here today, as I was, I think, 1.5 years ago at the last IRENA Innovation Week, to speak about demand-side management, and here in an area which is in the center of, I think, attention currently, with the great impulse presentations which were made just previously before. First of all, to present briefly Energy Pool, as many of you might not know the company. So Energy Pool is a leading flexibility and demand-side management operator, initially in France, but worldwide, with activities in the Netherlands, in other European countries like Belgium, and starting in Southern Europe as well. We're active in Japan, having a big portfolio there, in Turkey, and starting as well in the Middle East and in some African countries. Overall, totaling a portfolio of 8 gigawatts of flexibility. That's what we are doing, demand-side flexibility, and on top of that, we are also optimizing behind-the-meter systems for prosumers and operating microgrids, notably in some fancy areas in the Pacific Islands and in French Polynesia. So these are 2 areas, I believe, areas of expertise where we are operating in, and which might be interesting to the future world of data centers as well. That's why I'm here today. And I think it's quite interesting because this morning we had great presentations for those who were here about AI and what opportunities AI can bring to the energy sector and to the electricity systems especially. And now we had some inputs showing a bit what type of challenges basically AI also puts on the energy transition, and without even mentioning the challenges it will put on the grids which need to enable the energy transition. So we are here a bit in a type of loop in an ironic manner, and I think flexibility is one of the key elements which will enable basically also to bridge that gap. And I would like that we consider things which are opportunity and challenge, and to bridge that gap as much as possible. As a flexibility aggregator, up to now, we have a few conventional data centers in our portfolio. Up to now, these actors mainly didn't participate in demand response. It's very difficult. In the US, they're almost, rarely present, and also in France, it was very difficult given their traditional profile, given the operational constraints they are in, because very often they have huge constraints to be reliable, and it's embedded in SLAs with their clients for the operators, which leaves a very small way, I would say, to do some flexibility with those data centers. But things will change in the future, most probably. Why things will change? They will change first because I assume, and that's also why we are here today, the new generation of data centers are of different typologies. So they will have different profiles, different characteristics, different needs, different capabilities, and it will be key to power systems to be able to tap into the potential based on different characteristics of topologies of data center uses, from crypto mining to AI-driven inference and other needs. And this is an area which is, for now, relatively little explored. And on the other side, the second reason why things will change is that the power system is changing, and we discussed it a lot here today. The power system will embed more and more intermittent renewables, and it will need flexibility. And in order to match both, to bring lots of additional load to the system, and taking into account the constraint from more renewables and from constrained grid, it will force into a system where data centers can also get more flexible. Thank you.
I have already set out my stall, so I will pass over to Trigya.
Thank you. Hello, namaste, Germany. This is my first time here, so very glad to be here. I work at GRA, the Global Renewables Alliance. For those who don't know what GRA is, which is, I doubt that, but we are the single unified voice for all renewables around the world, everywhere, all the time. And we work with IRENA very closely on several issues on grids, supply chain permitting, finance, and of course, data centers and AI. I have a lot of, I wouldn't say I have a lot of technical expertise in that, so I work at policy. And something that we've come up with, which is very interesting, is matching demand and supply, matchmaking rather, of projects together. Maybe that is a solution. It's more difficult than how it sounds. Matchmaking sounds all rosy and nice, and like anything romantic and dating, it's never easy. People never really get along. People don't want to share information. So there is lack of information. There's a lot of gaps, as we see, but all is not lost. We have a very positive outlook. Renewables are doing the job. In fact, if you read the latest data, by Bloomberg, 62.2 gigawatts of power purchase agreements were signed. So maybe 24/7 carbon-free energy PPAs are the way to go. I always look at solutions, and I'm here to maybe listen to everybody and then piece it together. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gema del Rio. It's a pleasure to be here today representing the Spanish government and to share and to discuss the different experience. I would like first to congratulate Adrian, Jill, and Romain for the excellent presentation that really very well framed the problem we are facing with the rise of artificial intelligence. I fully agree with what they have presented, but as you may know, Spain is an advocate for renewable energies and energy diversification. It's also an advocate for the triple transition, meaning digital, environmental, and just transition coupled together, and we make this triple transition the dorsal spine of our country's strategy. We think is crucial for competitiveness and industrial development. And maybe we are quite optimistic, but we also need to see data centers as an opportunity to drive more demand for renewable energies, as we have a very ambitious targets in Spain. We ambition to reach 81% of renewables, electric renewables by 2030. So and the demand, electric demand is decreasing, so we really see this as an opportunity, not exempt of challenges, of course. And I fully agree that we need to diversify our supply and also reinforce the grid. But maybe my role as public body is also to highlight that we need to reinforce regulatory mechanisms to make these flexibility opportunities possible and to make data centers a real asset in the energy system of the future. So I hope we have a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. My name is Andrés Acosta. I am representing LevelTen Energy, and I'm based in Madrid, but I'm not representing the Spanish government, Gema is. I'm not representing the buyers, I'm not representing the sellers. We have a marketplace, which is a platform where buyers and sellers meet, trying to do the matchmaking Trigya was mentioning before. So we are very much hands-on, and we have eyes on what's happening in the PPA world and the transactions that are happening through our platform. And I'm happy to discuss what we're seeing in this space today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all the introductions. We'd like to start with a very simple question. We'll start on the demand side. What is the electricity consumption profile, or maybe characteristics of data centers, maybe the sort of mix of energy supplied to data centers, and does AI actually change anything at all compared to traditional data center builds?
So maybe I'll take a first shot at this one. And in our role, helping some of the key data center developers and operators procure renewable energy, we sort of, as I was saying before, we have eyes on what is it that they're looking for. So while we don't get into the hourly profiles and granularity of the whole detail quite yet, we do see that there are differences in both the way the business model has been put together. So of course there are, and here I think, Romain, you are the expert rather than me, but so there are data centers that are owned and operated by the final users of those data centers, and they can sort of procure energy with the knowledge that they're going to have a certain use for a long term, so they can procure long-term PPAs, and they know how they're going to drive the data center, so to say, in simple terms. While there are others who build data centers to rent, and they rent basically racks for computing, and those racks might or not be powered and might or not be needed, so those won't have that long-term visibility on what type of consumption they will have. Also, what type of use it will have depends on whether you are doing cloud computing or whether you're training an AI model. So that's going to change how intensive, how the peaks are going to be like, or how baseload the whole behavior will be. And that, of course, reflects the long-term strategy that said data center would have at procuring renewable energy. I don't know if someone wants to add something to that.
Yeah, maybe just to, on the impact that AI is having on the load profiles, the energy consumption. I think one important thing to mention is what I mentioned briefly was the business strategy around AI is scale. So this is the underlying assumption is that we need to scale infrastructure in order to progress in the AI arms race. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, because that drives a lot of the rationale and the build out that we're seeing today. And I wanted to mention also a big part of this is the investment in infrastructure, including the microchips. And we have microchips that are far more powerful. They're very efficient, but they're also more powerful than any microchips we've seen to date. And this is a really significant component in why AI is having like an outsized impact on the energy consumption overall of data centers.
So thanks for that introduction in the world of data centers. I think there is other components that we see changing as well. AI data center, all on, all off, nothing in the middle compared to other data centers that we've seen. Locations still being extremely strict. Those are maybe some of the uncertainties and difficulties. Is there anything else that we can point out around how data centers utilize power that is still a blocker for actually using renewables?
Maybe I'll take a first shot at that one too. If I get too annoying, let me know. So, yeah, so uncertainties, all of the uncertainties. I mean, because of the base load-ish type of profile that data centers have, and because of the intermittent nature of renewables, that of course poses an issue. And Jill was showing in her presentation that very, let's say, incendiary, I don't know if that's a word in English, but like this very flaming post about the data center claiming to be consuming solar at night. And while I think it is misleading saying that 100% procurement comes from renewables if you have a PPA in Spain and you have your data center in Germany, it is a way of incentivizing renewable energy development and deployment through those long-term PPAs. So what we're seeing is the uncertainties is how do I manage to get that base load type of profile, both in the terms of price setting and not being exposed to volatility of prices, but also the targets that we will discuss, I guess, later in about 24/7 matching, about 100% carbon-free energy, and how that matches that intermittence from the generation side. There are things happening, and we will discuss that in a minute, but at the moment, I think the biggest uncertainty as well is time to power, which is like, when can I get my data center connected to the grid? And sometimes that is actually driving the discussion even earlier than where the power is going to come from, when am I going to get the connection?
I fully agree with my colleague that I will also underline that we have a wide range of uncertainties today. First is the feasibility of such an amount of requests for connection for data centers. The other is that the market remains quite fragmented. There are different pilot projects for integrating different kinds of renewables, other low carbon sources, but also storage. There are also uncertainties about if microgrids could help, about the integration of the waste heating and cooling networks. So there is an impressive amount of opportunities, but also uncertainties. If, depending on the local context, what solution could be the most optimal, how can we manage to really be able to manage both the digital and the grid and the rest of energy systems, and also all the industries and all the consumers feel uncertainties about this process. And so I think that the most important thing is try to go one step at a time and try to really understand the solution that may work, and just to provide the mechanisms to promote them and to scale them.
Thanks very much for that. Let's pinpoint one thing. So we talked about flexibility earlier, and there is a lot of potential to unlock maybe more power if data center could be a bit flexible. And we've had very deep dive conversations before the panel around the ability of data centers to become more flexible. I'd love to know, can flexibility or should flexibility become central in the future of data centers?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I will try to give a bit of a system perspective and economic perspective on the subject maybe. So we talked a lot about uncertainty, and also for those who are planning the future grid and the future power system, it's a very difficult exercise given the uncertainty on the growth itself, the amount itself, but I liked, I think, Adrian's presentation before as well, because it's also the source and the strategy of the actors, because you have the growth of the consumption itself, which will depend on economic factor, which will depend also on disruptions. I mean, we've seen it with DeepSeek, with energy efficiency, which will also impact that demand growth. But it will also depend on to what extent this additional demand will source its power from the grids, from the national grids, and what part of that power will come from local sourcing, from co-located. I mean, we talk a lot about potentially SMRs in the future. We are not there yet. We talk about renewables coupled with batteries and so on. And for those who are planning the future network and investing into the grid and planning the future power system and its reliability, it's also a key part of the question. And on top of that, you had the question about what will be the level of flexibility of those new data centers which are new generation, new types of data centers with new usages, with potentially new clients and use cases and business cases behind. And it's one key additional question and element to deep dive into that and understand better what is the potential related to those processes, potentially some of them related to training. We talk about batch processing, can be delayed, other which are more, I would say, response time critical, can be less delayed, etc. So there needs to be a wider assessment on what are the capabilities, the characteristics, what can be delayed, what not, what can be the interruptibility of those loads or not. I would like to maybe mention, I mean, it will bring additional load and constraints and challenges to the power system, but it can also be seen as an opportunity somehow. I don't want to, I mean, you know, for instance, in systems like the US or in France, for instance, we have a big base load, low carbon energy and power available. That's also the reason why, from a political level, we are attracting currently those data centers, because we have a basically fixed cost system, power system. So we have fixed cost for our nuclear fleet, for renewable is also fixed cost energy. And in order to absorb that, basically, we need to have more consumption. Otherwise, the unitary cost will simply grow. So we need to electrify, we need to attract also new power consumers, but at the same time, we need to take into account the grid constraints, because even so we can accommodate a large load, we cannot do it 100% of the time. And that's the point, that's the issue. In countries like France or in the US, there is the load factor is not so big, so there is a big difference between the maximum peak load demand and the average demand over the year. So this shows there is a great potential for basically accommodating new load if it can show some flexibility. I want to refer to a recent study that was released, I think, 2 months ago by the Duke University in the US, which came to the assessment that only in the Texas area, so in Texas in the US, the system could, with current capacities, accommodate 15 gigawatt, additional gigawatt of data centers of additional load with existing capacities, provided that they can be curtailed between 0.25 and 1% of the time. So this means basically if those data centers can curtail their power consumption between 20 hours and 80 hours within a year, they can be accommodated given the current system constraints. And the study has had a look at the whole US, and for the whole US, that capacity is about 100 gigawatts. And this means that those data centers would have to curtail their power consumption in a few small amount of hours within the year, and not even totally, only 50% of their power would need to be curtailed, and in an average time of 1 to 2 hours time duration. So it just shows the tremendous potential if there are some small behavioral changes to be able to accommodate these additional loads with actual existing constraints. And there are different means, I think, which are started to be explored today. So data center can do what we call temporal flexibility. So that's basically moving or shifting their consumption. For instance, for training and batch processing, they can reschedule and plan those training in order to adapt to some constraints. They can also do, and I know that Google has had some pilots, they can do a spatial flexibility, moving the power consumption from one data center in a location to another data center. They could also reduce the speed of their processes in order to reduce their power load at some moments, and they could participate to grid services. So somehow these additional loads we need to contribute as well to the effort, and if they don't, it will just increase dramatically the system costs overall.
Wonderful. Thanks very much for this explanation. We all know renewable energies have got, well, at least a couple of goals: CO2 reductions and reducing price flexibility. With that huge increase in demand, what's your take on the impact on CO2 and pricing?
Does anyone else want to go?
Yeah?
Will I go? Okay. Briefly, I also wanted to briefly mention on the demand flexibility side, because I didn't cover it a lot in the presentation, because Adrian had, but we really see that as one of the 3 key components to transitioning to 100% renewable energy. We can't do it without demand flexibility. It's got to be scaling up renewables as much as possible, plus storage, plus the demand flexibility. So very exciting, the work that Sylvie is doing on this. On the emissions and the costs, so what I hope was clear from the presentation was that there's 2 ways that data centers could impact emissions. One is by directly driving up emissions if we go the fossil fuel route, which I think we all agree is not ideal. And the other is related to the kind of displacement of fossil fuel use onto other sectors, or the delay for other sectors. So this is something that we also need to keep in mind on while we're managing the demand. And I've forgotten my other point, which is on the costs. There it is. Costs, if we look at the costs of data centers in terms of energy and electricity prices, the EU has already flagged in the Affordable Energy Action Plan that they want to keep an eye on this. And I wanted to mention the need for policy coherence, because there is the Affordable Energy Action Plan, and then there is the EU Cloud and AI Development Act. And it's not clear that these 2 initiatives of the EU are like aligned with each other, because you have one that speaks about the risk and the other that is planning to triple data center capacity and has quite weak requirements around sustainability that tends to focus on energy efficiency, which is not the only metric we should be looking at when we look at sustainability. We need to look at the overall energy consumption and the fossil fuel mix, etc. So policy coherence there is extremely important. I would mention in the US, Harvard has done a study that data centers are driving up costs for other ratepayers because of inbuilt subsidies in the system. In Ireland as well, some capacity market subsidies, which are subsidies for energy providers, have also gone to data centers. So it is important. Some of these will be justified, some of them will be not, but we need to be aware of these so we understand the trade-offs that and how they're actually impacting the costs.
Yeah, I would like to focus on the first point that you were making, not on the impact of AI in emissions of other sectors, but the impact of the consumption for data centers. And here, of course, the biggest chunk is the scope 2, so the indirect emissions by the electricity used for those data centers. There's a part of it that needs to be as well taken care of, which is the direct scope 1 consumption when those data centers are running gensets, diesel gensets, for example. So those tend to be overlooked, and those are important to be taken care of as well. And they're waiting as well for solutions for being able to have that availability and that stability without having to recur to diesel gensets. So that's something that sometimes gets forgotten. And when we focus again on the scope 2 emissions, on the ones coming from the electricity consumption, what's the impact of the CO2 emissions from their consumption? That depends as well a lot on who you ask. No? You were mentioning before, Jill, how different companies define their emissions and their targets in different ways. And then, of course, you have like a sort of a ground base for a lot of these, which is the greenhouse gas protocol, and how some of them adhere to, for example, more like regular initiatives like RE100, which is like very well known, but a lot of them, because of their market power and because of their brand power, they decide to come up with their own. and how they calculate that is very different from like a perspective from the Googles saying, I want to have 24/7 carbon-free energy matching to some of the Amazons more around emissionality and trying to decarbonize the grid where they operate. And that drives the way they procure energy in a very important way, of course, because they're looking for projects in different geographies and with different profiles. So all of that to say, there is not one way in which they are impacting CO2. There are several. And that sort of mix of factors allow for creativity and innovation to find products and contracting. I mean, this sounds like super boring for innovation, but you can also innovate in contracting structures and market design, not only technology, and that's what's going to solve some of these issues, I think.
Just wanted to add to this. I had a very interesting discussion with some of these very important buyers a couple of weeks back, and the conversation was around how do we in a way weaken the GHG protocol or not change it. Let's not move it towards 24/7 CFP matching because it's going to be more expensive for the big buyers. I do not think that's the right way to go. It's setting a very wrong precedent. And I think we all can agree, the demand side has a huge responsibility and role to play. It's not just in procuring and creating renewables, but also matching and being credible about it. You cannot weaken a system which can hold them accountable. Which leads me to a conversation we had in Brussels last week about political consensus. All of these amazing discussions that we have at different forums, from IRENA to COP30 to several in between, sometimes we miss the point. Data centers are run by people. Demand is also people. All these CEOs are human beings, and so are politicians. We need to be a bridge, maybe not point fingers, of course point them when it's needed, but get them together to work with each other. I will keep on talking about this, and we run a sort of an informal group which has a lot of great thinking think tanks, great minds in it, and we are forming a sort of a coalition of champions who want to talk about this up till COP30. So anybody who's interested can reach out to me after this.
And just briefly add that I fully agree with Jill in terms of the first step is to really define standards and make possible to understand the real emissions data centers are driving, because with the current metrics and the lack of transparency in the sector, we don't really have a real understanding of the situation, and that's why the Spanish strategy for artificial intelligence claims for a specific standard, and different regulatory advances are underway to really promote this. And I also agree with what you have commented about that innovation also comes from the sandboxes and other kind of instruments to make more suitable pricing, dynamic pricing, and other market measures.
So hopefully we're not just painting data centers as the big bad wolf in that story, right? So let's try and find some positives out there, or maybe not. We know data centers are putting efforts in actually acquiring renewable energies. Do you believe they're a force for good, or actually maybe delaying actually access to renewables for other industries?
Well, I have to jump in this one, because that's what we do. We help them acquire renewable energy, and while I know that of course they have all sorts of impacts, the biggest impact that I think this industry has is by setting standards and by motivating others to do stuff that would be unthinkable before they go and do it. So we were just talking about 24/7 carbon-free energy. This is of course like a very big goal to achieve, but before we had that, we had 100% renewable energy matching at a yearly basis. And if they hadn't done that in the beginning, then we wouldn't be seeing other industries that now are doing the same because of mechanisms that were developed to support the data center industry in those strategies. So they were some of the first ones to come from the US with the concept of PPAs back in 2015, 16, 17, and in Spain mostly, and then gradually in the UK, the Nordics, in Germany recently, sort of, it took a while. And they did serve that example role model, so to say. And I think we have to be, as you were saying, not careful, not painting them in sort of the bad picture of these big energy hungry animals, but how they are, through their power and their market power, enabling structures and figures that we're seeing now being adopted by other industries. And on the cost front, yes, of course, demand could drive cost up, but we're also seeing something around, you probably all have heard about cannibalization of renewable profiles and negative prices in some of these markets. And when you have these situations in the market as it is, then it's very difficult for project developers to develop new renewable energy capacities, and mechanisms like the ones developed by these big data center companies are the ones who are enabling this long-term planning for financing for these projects and getting these projects online, which in turn are going to drive down the cost of energy in average because they're displacing more expensive technologies like gas and other fossil fuels-based technologies. So it has to be careful not to just put it as eating all the energy and they're driving prices up. There's a certain effect of that, but for the most part, I'm positive that the effect is the right one, and it's a motivational one. So, yeah.
I think the demand side can focus a bit on complementary assets. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, but going back in history, if you understand how fossil fuels came into being and how they got popularized, of course, cars were made. And the concept called complementary assets, chemicals came from fossil fuel, I would say, distillery and refining. So maybe there is a lot of conversations around technological innovation, and this is the right forum for it. Why can't we think more in that direction? And how can those complementary assets not just help with demand-side management or prediction of the energy consumption, but other things also, which is maybe heating and cooling of the neighborhood areas? There was a very interesting presentation by the Chinese delegation yesterday on this topic. You can reach out to them as well.
No, I mean, yeah, I think you also speak about getting the heat for other uses, etc. So there are lots of opportunities around the data center to implement more circular economy principles and so on, and probably a lot of untapped potential. I think today the incentives are maybe lacking and not always there. But I think you mentioned it before, we are at the stage, okay, 24/7 matching and so on was good to support development of renewable capacities, but exactly as you said, at this stage of the energy transition, or at a certain stage of the energy transition where certain countries are today, the challenge is another one. It's not how to support renewables, but it's how to integrate and how to manage a system with high penetration of renewables. And in those systems, clearly, I think that will be the trigger for those data center operators and then clients behind as well to change a bit the paradigm, because there will be no choice. I mean, from the moment on, and you presented as well, I think, Adrian, the flexible connection agreement with TSOs, at some point there will be a problem for those to connect to the national grid. Even in grids with available electricity most of the time, and even low carbon electricity, there will be struggles to cover the peak, etc. So the TSOs will ask those actors to also contribute to system security, to grid reliability, and from that moment on, there will be an incentive for those for that I think ecosystem to innovate. And in fact, I believe it's even a great opportunity for value innovation in the sector to also change their models, their operating models and their business models, taking into account the diversity of clients and use cases and usages behind AI-driven data centers, in order to have other value propositions, faster access to market, because faster access to TSO connection, lower costs if they can show flexible for some of the time. So you can bring real innovation into the business model for some usages where maybe you have some more flexibility and you can value it from a speed access to market and from a cost perspective.
I wanted to talk about the idea briefly of a tipping point, to maybe explain a bit what I was trying to explain in our presentation, where there is definitely a level to which data centers are an opportunity. You know, they're driving grid upgrades. You know, as we're seeing more and more data centers, it's incentivizing grid operators and regulators to be like, oh, we need to upgrade our grids. This is a positive, and accelerating the build out of renewable energy. There just is also potentially a tipping point where that opportunity starts to become a risk the more we scale. And what I would come back to is the need for policy coherence. And I mentioned the EU and the lack of what we see as policy coherence today. I would also mention the UK. I think it's a very interesting test case to see how well the UK's AI action plan is aligned with the UK's plan for clean energy up till 2030. Because today we don't know if those two plans are aligned, and as far as we can tell, they are not. And this will be very interesting to indicate how well we can get policy coherence on this and avoid the issue that this sector will start to delay the decarbonisation of other sectors.
That's very well put together. So I want to make sure that we've got enough time for the final presentations. We've had one more topic to actually warrant its own speaking slot. So we've got about 3-minute, give or take, for one final question. So I'd like to invite a panel to explain how can large infrastructure projects work more effectively, hand in hand, with the grid or renewable energy providers to secure stable, sustainable energy. Maybe talk around the public-private partnerships, anything that is either ongoing or should be happening.
I can go for that, and I'm glad you asked that question. So PPP is the name of the game. The governments obviously have to do the work that they set out to do. Certain regions of the world, especially Asia Pacific and Latin America, will see a massive boom in data centers, and they are the supply chains of the world. We need to look at that right now. Also, the corporates' demand and supply side both need to work together. One doesn't work without the other, obviously. But we have a campaign upcoming, which is called the PPA campaign. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It is basically partner, procure, and accelerate, both focused on demand side and supply side integration and matchmaking. So we are basically convening corporates. We have about 200 plus I would say signatories or corporate participants from last year, and we're looking at tripling that number up to COP30. There would be a host, or as they say, policy omnibus of recommendations, which I wouldn't get into because my esteemed colleagues would definitely talk about that. But again, reach out to me after this, and we can talk more about it.
Okay, I think this is it. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for bringing on their experience, hands-on experience, and also their vision of what should be happening in the near future. If you want to continue the discussions, please come and reach out to any of us, either now, LinkedIn later, something like this. We can always continue this. And to further the points that we've been making, I'd like to welcome Michael Barth, Senior Corporate Counsel Europe at CyrusOne. Some of you may have had actually a tour of the facility yesterday, so that will be a great example of this. And he is also the advisory board member of the German Data Center Association. So thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you. Yeah, Michael Barth, part of the German management team of CyrusOne. Just out of curiosity, who has heard of CyrusOne before? Could you raise your hand? Okay, those who were on the panel, and maybe some I toured on Tuesday. Okay, so the next slide will show you a bit about what we do. So we're one of the largest data center developers and operators globally. We run 55 data centers across the globe. We're headquartered in Dallas and have now our 25th anniversary coming up, just over 1 gigawatt in operations and another 1.4 gigawatt contracted, which means we have secured the land and the power, and we're currently developing it. The enterprise value you see there is 16 billion. That was when KKR and GIP took us off the New York Stock Exchange and in the largest going private transaction globally. And since then, we've grown 15 to 20% year over year. So you can do the math. It's closer to the 20-odd billion. In 2 years ago, we acquired, we made a joint venture in Japan, where we're investing to build 900 megawatts of capacity. So since then, we're a truly global company. Whilst the panelists looked on the consumption side and how renewables are used in data centers, I want to look at the other side, how waste heat of data centers can be used. And there's a lighthouse project of a sustainable data center development, which is our Frankfurt 7 project in Griesheim. And that is one of the oldest, actually the oldest chemistry park in Germany. It's 180 years old. And it was used by Clariant, probably one of the most polluted soil you can find in all of Germany. And our partners of BIOS in 2019 decided to develop it into a modern mixed-use quarter. It was initiated in 2019. You can see it's 73 hectare of land that was inaccessible to the public and highly congested. And when they turned it in 2019, they made a bidding process out of it, and we came up front not only because we made the best commercial offer, but also we share a common sustainability view, and they want to develop it into one of the most sustainable quarters of Frankfurt. This is the data center. It's 81 megawatts of capacity. You can see we're using green facades. So the Sustainability Act is not only on energy efficiency or providing the waste heat to heat the whole campus, but we also believe in diversity, and we have bees, and so the green facade here, it's actually quite expensive, so the renderings are a bit wrong, but this is our aspect. The gray halls are our data centers. The rest is the development of BIOS. They're Swiss Life backed, and when completed, the data center will provide 40 megawatts of waste heat to 70 new buildings and approximately 500,000 square meters. Since CyrusOne is a founding member of the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, CNDCP, we committed to be climate neutral by 2030, and since 2021, 100% of our portfolio is renewable. So what this means is the whole site will be heated and cooled by the waste heat from the data center, so carbon-free. We are aiming for a DGNP Platinum and BREEAM Very Good certificate, so very efficient, and a design PUE of 1.21. That is PUE, for those of you who are not familiar, it's power uses effectiveness. It has the ratio of the energy that's going into a data center and what it's coming out as IT capacity. So 1.21 is very good by design. The Energy Efficiency Act that was implemented last year requires 1.2 from 1st of July next year, but that depends on the load profile. And since our customers, the largest hyperscalers, so you saw on other slides, are controlling that, and we as an operator can't control that. You can only design it to be at a certain efficiency. We do this without adiabatic cooling, so no evaporative cooling. We are the world leaders when it comes to liquid-free cooling, or not liquid-free, but water-free cooling. That is, we're headquartered in Dallas, which is a water-scarce area. So 81% of our portfolio is already water-free. We're aiming for 100%, and in Frankfurt, we are currently investing a couple of million to turn the historic older buildings where you use adiabatic into cool water-free cooling technologies. How is it done? Our partners at BIOS are building a low heat network on the campus. So 6 kilometers of new pipes will be built from a centralized heat station that's located in a historic monument. So you can see the pipes going from our ceilings where the chillers are into the heat station operated by BIOS. And there it's decentralizedly distributed to the heat pumps that are in the buildings. These heat pumps will be powered by solar. So we participated in a study, in a pilot of the Landesenergieagentur Hessen and the University of Kassel, that this is actually the most efficient way of providing the waste heat because there is very little loss when you transport the energy of 29 degrees and then get it to the 45 degrees you need in modern houses to heat them, rather than building a large heat pump that then uses, again, a lot of energy. Being a lawyer, we had to overcome some legal aspects to be able to do that. The interface that's under the Energy Efficiency Act is actually the heat transfer station. So a lot of misunderstandings in the communities we operate in is the municipalities say, well, you need to build the heat pump. And we say, no, we are operating a data center. And it's a waste product, so we can do much better things than blowing it in the air. So we can provide it, but all we do is we will install the piping, which then connects to a local heat grid provider. BIOS is responsible for operating the heat center. And what we need to do or what we need to avoid is becoming a utility provider. So we're not operating the data center to produce waste heat. Our customers use this to sell their IT load, be it cloud or AI. And if they operate it, then our data center produces heat. That's also a common misunderstanding from the municipalities that they say, well, you need to guarantee that you provide waste heat. We can't do that because for the given reasons, it would be driving a car so your exhaust pipe is running, yeah, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't make sense. So there needs to be a independent and fully redundant infrastructure by the heat grid operator, yeah? In this case, BIOS, and that's what they do with the heat pumps. And there's also another tax issue we had to overcome to implement that. We wanted to give the heat away for free because it's a waste product. Yeah? We didn't want to earn money. However, under German legislation, we would have needed to pay VAT on the power because it has a commercial value. So giving it away for free would have resulted in a tax payment to the government. So we would have been punished for providing it for free. So we did an arm's length transaction and provided it for a little amount that hopefully will be acceptable by the tax authorities. Our Frankfurt 7 development shows that data centers are not just energy-hungry buildings that we heard before, but if done right and it meets the right infrastructure in the neighborhood, they can be part of the energy transition. And we're looking forward to do more of those energy projections. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers this afternoon. I think it's been a really interesting session. And once again, this idea of innovation, not just in technology, but in collaboration in the way that we work, And obviously, also, with regard to the tax rules, is rather important. So we're going to close now for our coffee break. If you could be back here for 3:30, where we're going to have 2 parallel sessions. In this room, we're going to be focusing on digitalization for the energy transition, looking at case studies. So we've got some specifics to work through. And looking at creating value locally, skills and supply chains will be in the Kamahar Grand. So I'll see you in half an hour. Oh, photograph. Sorry, could all the speakers come back up to the stage for a photograph? Is that what you wanted, Adrian? Closing remarks? Oh, I'm so sorry.
All right, so clearly I am the last thing standing between you and some fresh air, so I'll make it very, very quick. So thank you, IRENA, for organizing the session, for all of you for standing with us as we talked about our passionate subjects. I'll take just a couple of remarks. First of all, there is an agreement on the growth of the industry. We just all disagree how much. So that's we're going to try and fix that by next year when we all come back to the stage. I'll take one very good quote from the first presentation. Renewable, non-renewable, whatever. I think that's going to have to change. It's going to have to be a renewable or nothing in one way or another. Clearly, there is a number of challenges. One of them is not technological. All of you working diligently on actually making them available. What we come to the conclusion to is that we need far deeper changes in the data center industry to actually accept and on board actually all of the technologies that you put at our disposal. I was taken aback by the amount of capacity left on the grid. For the last 10 years, I've always heard there is nothing left, nothing left, nothing left. If only we knew that by dropping a data center for 40 hours a year, we could get another 100 gigawatt, I think we'd look at it again. So we've had, and you've seen, the practical, perfect example of what a great data center is. Thank you, Michael, for actually showing us what can be done from renewable energies to heat reuse to low water usage or no water usage, as you put it, and the high efficiency. We shall all take a page of your book and do exactly the same thing. So on that note, thank you very much to all the panelists for their insights. I said I'd keep it brief. I will leave it there. And thank you again for Adrian for putting all of this together, him and all of his team. Thank you very much.